You're listening to the PR Wind Down Podcast, the show for public relations professionals who are ready to see real change in the PR industry. We are your hosts, April White and Laura Schooler. Let's get ready to wind down. Thunderstorm Central. Laura, how are you?
Hi, I'm a little afraid the sky just turned dark gray. It's like 96 degrees in New York City. Literally, when you walk outside, there's no oxygen and you feel like you just walked into like a pizza oven.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, so I've been sweating inside, not as bad as if I was outside. But more important is PR.
Yes.
Ooh, do you hear that?
No, but I think the sky might be falling on podcast interviews.
Perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Do you see what I did there for the segue?
No, what's the segue? I don't get it.
So I'm skipping ahead to PR News of the Week because I feel like it's appropriate to the sky is falling. But there's a story in Bloomberg about how podcast guests are paying up to $50,000 to appear on popular shows, which is outrageous. And most of the time, it's not disclosed. Critics are calling it payola, and then they're saying that listeners deserve better disclosure of promotional ties.
Wow. So do they give examples of podcasts that are charging this money?
Dave Asprey, the host of The Human Upgrade, charges guests an average of $50,000 to appear on his biohacking podcast. So that's one example.
So I've got two questions. Like, is this a podcast that matters? And why are people paying this much money to be on it, right? In PR, you don't pay to be on. That's PR, earned. It's earned.
I mean, that's changed a lot with the broadcast, though. So a lot of the broadcast opportunities now that the team gets tend to be pay-for-play, even regional ones. Even they'll do a little regional, like, hey, we'll put you on these regional markets for X amount of dollars. And it's direct pay-to-play, but they don't disclose it.
So, right. So that's like on local news stations or like local morning shows or whatever. And then they air it on other local stations in the region or whatever that the same company owns or has a deal with or whatever. Is it usually product placement type?
I mean, it tends
segments
to be because of the nature of broadcast. Yeah, it does tend to be that, or like a book or whatever, something with a product involved. And then the same thing is true for some nationals. They end up, okay, yeah, we've got this opportunity. We're doing a roundup of July 4 barbecue products or whatever, and we've got a slot open. It's only $20,000 or whatever it is. So I think that the news media is in denial that it's slowly being taken over by advertising.
Yeah.
And this is just the latest example where I think what's really unfortunate is I think part of the reason podcasts have gotten so popular is because they have the appearance of not being part of the mainstream news network that people are not trusting for various reasons. I think, questioning the integrity of the shows or publications and who they're being influenced by ad dollar wise or otherwise politically. I think, unfortunately, if podcasts are falling into the same trap, then we no longer have the unbastardized form of news that people trust if this continues. So it's definitely alarming, I think.
What do you think about the amount of money that this article is saying? $50,000?
I would like to be paid $50,000 to be on a podcast. I cannot imagine ever paying 50. I mean, for what, Joe Rogan? Like, which podcast is worth that? Maybe Joe Rogan, but I don't think Joe Rogan would take it.
Yeah, I don't think that he charges.
And I know podcasts are expensive to put together, and podcasts are struggling with how to make money, and it is really time intensive to make them. Means that it can be very expensive, and how do you recuperate that money? But boy, I don't know about making guests pay to be on your show. Seems like there's a better way to do that without ruining your credibility as a podcast.
Well, right, because then the interviewee probably has the right to edit it, right, if they're paying for it. Now, I think in most cases, podcasts like ours, that we're not a gotcha podcast. We tell people that, they can edit themselves or tell us later if they, didn't like the way they said something or something came out, etc. I guess the thing to me that's the most surprising is how much money they're being charged and that people are paying for one podcast. I mean, you could be getting, I don't know, 5 or 6 months of like PR strategy and execution. So it's just crazy to me that somebody would choose to spend that kind of money on one podcast.
Who can afford to pay $50,000
Well,
to be on a
what I was saying is that you could take that money and get 5 or 6 months of PR strategy and execution and be hitting all kinds of audiences as opposed to being on one podcast.
Mhm.
It's not wise expenditure.
I feel like you were trying to say it's not strategic, it's not wise, and it's not a good expenditure all in the same breath.
That was one word I wanted to come up with. Unless maybe it was Joe Rogan, then maybe that would make sense, but I don't think he charges people to be on his show. So it's really a marketing play then, right? It's advertising. It's an advertorial.
In the form of a podcast. It's alarming. I don't like it. I do not like it.
Do you think people would pay us $50,000 to be on this show?
No, but we could start charging them five. Hey, pay us $5.
$5, yeah.
Pay us $5 to be on our show.
Or it's like, the 5 cents that Lucy charges the doctor is in, like on peanuts.
And there's a fee for last minute cancellations.
Right. I think that we should have a fee for last minute cancellations. We should charge people $50, and if they show up, then they get the money back. And if they don't, we keep it.
Oh my God, that is so funny. On that note, should we invite our guest of the day, who is also known as our beloved podcast producer, Veronica Yip?
Yes, let's get Veronica on the screen.
I was gonna say she's in our waiting room, but she's not. She's already in the meeting secretly.
She's controlling them.
About to come
like
from behind
Oz.
the curtain, the Oz curtain. It's like the great and powerful Oz comes forward, and there she is.
Hello.
So everyone, go get on YouTube now so you can see Veronica officially.
Yeah, quite a sight. I had a horrible t-shirt on before this, so you're getting the best version.
Well, thank you for that. And the hair looks glamorous as always.
Thank you.
So Veronica, what do you think about this crazy idea of people paying $50,000 to be on a podcast?
So at first I thought it sounded astronomical, but then I know that there are certain types of podcasts that kind of have a community around them that can be like really, really niche. So I know there are some shows that have like an exclusive Facebook group and it's associated with the show and there's thousands of people in it. And if that's something that you're trying to reach, if you have a particularly niche area of expertise or a topic that you're really trying to tap into, and there's a 10,000 person Facebook group associated with this podcast that are like devout followers of this show, then it might be worth investing to get in front of that specific kind of captive audience that is waiting every week for this show to come out. So I can see in a situation like that it could be valuable in that way to pay for.
So that, because you're literally trying to like network and connect to the ardent followers of podcast XYZ. But I'm thinking, so I'm not begrudging a community or a company or whatever from making money. I don't think that they should charge to be on the podcast, though. I think there might be other ways that they can help these people connect to their network that isn't infringing on what seems to be an editorial media interview. You can charge them to sponsor an event that you have, or charge them to put on an event that they're, either in real life or online. You can charge them to pay to send some sort of item, to all of the followers. But to have them on an arguably editorial interview, that's my problem.
Yeah, I can see that if it is like a news show. I know a lot of them are more narrative, or I know true crime is a really big industry, and sometimes they'll pay experts to be on the show because they might be, I don't know, a blood splatter expert, for example, and they want this expert opinion. So I've seen that done before. But I guess it would depend on the format of the show. Like if you're presenting as a news broadcast, for example, that's really
Right.
different than a narrative podcast or a history
Mm-hmm.
podcast or something like
Well,
that.
that's interesting. So yeah, if you're on because you're sort of almost like a paid actor or a paid character or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
that's something different to me because that's like you're on a TV show or right to me. Right, that's different. I don't
Yeah.
have a problem with that because people get paid to be on TV shows, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's a sort of creative, like you said, narrative.
Well, the other thing is like companies, I mean, because I've done some consumer PR where you hire a celebrity spokesperson, and
Right.
in that case, the outlet's not paying. However, the PR firm for
The
fill in the blank
brand.
product, Hyatt Hotels, is hiring the Bachelor and the Bachelorette to come on to
Right.
talk about their relationship and also mention that they like got together in the Hyatt or whatever, right? So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that people do all the time. So, in that regard, maybe the outlet isn't paying them per se,
But
but
the
somebody's
sponsor or the
somebody's paying them. I guess to play devil's advocate to the other point I made, it's just because I'm going to be on the other side of myself now. But like podcasts are also opinion formats, right?
right.
So, on the other hand, are they really viewed as sources of objective news or just as sources of
Edutainment.
I think it depends probably on the show. So if it's a news commentary podcast, like I listen to a lot of NPR content. They have a commentary podcast on politics, and it is commentary. You're there for the commentary because you respect the commentators. But they also do a News Now podcast, which is 4 minutes of like straight dry read of headlines like this happened today, this happened today, this happened today, this happened today. Here's the stock market update, goodbye. And it's only 4 minutes. And like that's the way that I guess sub brand is positioned as being just really objective news. So I almost think that because there's so many podcasts and so many types that you can't put podcasts in a bucket of being objective or not because there's so much diverse content
Yeah.
happening in there that like there's straight commentary podcasts, there's like somebody talking about like tips for taking care of your pets, and there's somebody over here talking about how to start a business, and there's somebody over here delivering news. It's just so different.
Well, I want to back up a tiny bit. Veronica produces at least 3 podcasts in her life. So, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do and what the differences or maybe the nuances are between the podcasts and what you've learned since you started doing this?
So the 3 podcasts that we put out through Trust Relations, they're all related to different aspects of communication, but even within that, the structure of them and the content and the vibe is really, really different between the 3. And shows have different chemistry between them. So for the PR wind down, of course, we are going for our kind of irreverent, pulling back the curtain on issues in the industry, talking about things that other PR practitioners might not have a place to talk about or feel comfortable talking about in the context of the industry. So it kind of has that punchy, fun vibe, but then has some of those really serious topics embedded in it. That looks completely different than what we try to create for the Hype Busters podcast, which is like rapid fire, humorous commentary on more often than not, like poorly executed campaigns, calling out things that didn't work, things that are a little bit too weird, or things that are so weird that they do work, but it's got that humor aspect and there's still some like nuggets of insight there, but it's just presented in a much more like dry run, like humor focused way. So I think that probably the hardest part about it and the thing that makes the show so different from each other, you kind of have to shape what that identity is going to be. And then, of course, make sure that the dynamic that's happening between the hosts can actually support that dynamic. Because if those
Mm-hmm.
two things don't gel, then you're not going to get something that anybody wants to listen to, and nobody wants that.
for
And what's
sure.
the third?
Oh, and then we have Trust Relations, the podcast. I think that straddles the line a little bit in that there is a lot of humor happening there and a lot of silly moments and levity and less of the super hard hitting topics that we talk about here on the PR Wind Down, but a little bit more analytical than what we have happening with Hype Busters. So it's kind of like a happy medium between the two, I think, which just happened really naturally out of the dynamic that happens between April, who is our 3-time host, but the co-host on that show, and then Hamish, who is our integrated marketing. Yeah.
So is it, but that one's
Communication.
more about marketing?
Yes, so they
It's
all serve different purposes. Yeah, Veronica can explain that, but they all have different audiences basically.
Yeah, it's a little bit more of that integrated marketing, digital communications world, whereas we stick pretty heavily to the PR stuff on this show, a lot more social media and trend focused on Hype Busters. And then Trust Relations, the podcast, kind of hits that line of the evolving relationship between PR and integrated marketing and how they're kind of blending together. And that's based on the expertise of April having a lot of experience as a PR practitioner and Hamish being more embedded in that digital communication side of things.
All right. So what have you, are there like two big things that you've learned in the 2 years? Like you came in and you had never done a podcast before, right, Veronica?
Right. I had just listened to them.
So then all of a sudden you become like a podcast producer. And what are like some of the biggest things that you've learned or that have evolved or whatever? Is there anything that stands out?
Yeah, when you first ask, I think what comes to mind for me is number one, that it is a big commitment if you want it to be good. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of hours in the recording booth, a lot of time to edit, and a lot of adaptability to make sure that if you want that show to go out on time, you have to be willing to kind of flex and put in the time and make sure that you're producing a good product and have the ability to commit that time. So I think that's one big thing that everybody says it takes a lot of time, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like getting a puppy. People say it's going to be hard and time consuming, but it's like way more than you would imagine until you do
Yeah.
it. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing that was probably a little bit harder to learn was if something's not working, you have to get rid of it. You can't keep something because you like the idea of it, because that chemistry is being served up on a silver platter to your audience that you're trying to reach. And if you're putting something in front of them that clearly doesn't work or isn't creating the vibe that you want to create, you have to get rid of it. You can't force it. It's never going to work. And it's going to make everything harder for you.
And true or false, the best of the three is this one, right?
I have such a special place in my heart for the PR wind down, because I feel like we all kind of fought through like the jungle of figuring out podcasting together on this show, and it has a really special place in my heart. It's the eldest.
So that's her way of saying yes without saying yes. You can't pick your favorite child, but it's okay. It's cool. There's people who produce like, what are the ones like Anna Faris or the armchair expert, Dax Shepard, or like, would you ever want to like produce like a big celebrity hosted one?
I think it would be really amazing to have access to the resources that you would have with that type of like a huge budget on a big celebrity show, because you'd have access to like any sound effect you want, any like custom settings, a lot of a broader guest access. You could probably snap up whoever you want on Armchair Expert. I know they recently interviewed Halsey, and she's like a mega pop star, and they're able to snap up some of those really, really top tier guests. So I think it would be fun to have access to all of the creative options that it would unlock, to be able to have all of those resources at your disposal, the team to support it, and make sure that you're putting out a product that's worth the amount of money that's behind it. I think that would be really cool. But I can imagine it would also be a lot more complicated in terms of the rules around what your guests are allowed to say, like working under different contracts. I think that there would be a lot of complexity to it, and you would need that big team to support how delicate it would be. So I can see it being fun and interesting, but I'm sure it's extremely stressful.
Well, right. You'd be dealing with some people's like PR people or lawyers. And the other part of it, you probably be dealing more with like advertising and sponsorship, right? That's the piece that always interested in me when doing like a celebrity or a big, name podcast. Is there anything else, April, that you want to ask Veronica?
We didn't ask you that we should have.
What have you learned from doing it? Like, have you learned things about your interview style or your dynamic together or your own expertise or how you present on camera or anything like that that you didn't expect to learn from hosting?
That's a good question. I try not to watch myself on camera back because I think it would make me neurotic. For me, I feel like I got more confident in time in just showing up and improving. I think when we first started, I was so nervous. Like, what am I going to say? It's not scripted, and I need to have something intelligent to say here. What's it going to be? And I would think I was worried that I wouldn't have anything of interest to say or anything meaningful. One of the things this is going to sound like a little bit egotistical, but it just feels like I don't know how much I know until I hear myself, and I'm like, "Oh, I've picked up a lot over the years doing all this stuff.
Yeah, I would agree
I
with
have
that.
opinions that I don't realize I have." And then hearing them, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I did have that opinion," right? So it's really strange because I hear things come out on the
Mm-hmm.
podcast that I must have thought about at some point in time or must have deep thoughts about at some point. When does it happen? When I'm sleeping? I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's not like I sit there and marinate in these thoughts and then come up with some, beautiful teriyaki or something. It's like it just it's like I just say things that apparently I've thought all along but didn't know I even had opinions on. And then the more that happens, the more I start to see connections between them. Oh, that's really interesting. I thought this and I thought this, but I never put them together. But I hear them come out on the podcast and it's like, oh, those are really interrelated. Or I really have, a passion for this particular topic. Like censorship, man, I mean, I was passionate about it, but I didn't know I was that into it. Like it comes up all the time, right? All these things that come up over and over and over. So that's been really, really interesting to see and just feel like I'm getting my sea legs, as it were, in terms of just being comfortable. Just, okay, I'm just going to say something and maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
stupid, but as long as I can laugh at myself, nobody cares. And if it's smart, then great.
Yeah.
I do agree with you, April, that sometimes I hear myself say things, especially like on old podcasts. If I click on one, I'm like, how did I know that? Or I don't even remember like, having that opinion. But the other thing is, and I haven't noticed recently, and I hope it's because I've gotten better. I used to say a lot more filler words, like or all of that, and I haven't noticed it as much
You're really
recently.
upset about your likes.
Yeah.
I remember
Well,
that.
yeah, I hated it, and
Started to self-edit.
I felt as though I was doing it a lot, and I just haven't heard it as much when we edit it, because we get the show and we edit it. I haven't been like, oh my god, there's 50 likes in there, or whatever stupid word I was using too much. So I hope it's because I'm doing it less and not because I'm just used to hearing it. I don't hear it anymore.
No, there are objectively fewer, and it only comes out when you're really excited about a story and you're like really going and you're describing something like exciting, and
Banging
then
on
you
the
start to do
table.
it. Yeah, but there are less.
Otherwise, I think I was born to be a podcaster, so I'm good.
Veronica, what other questions do you have for us since you've been behind the scenes? Any other burning, like, I wonder what it's like, or like, I don't know, anything else that's been in your
I
head that
guess.
you didn't even know was in your head?
Sure. When it comes to the topics, I know a lot of the times we're kind of touching base a little bit about what we're going to discuss in the show beforehand. You kind of pick things that pique your interest, but you don't really start diving into it until you're doing it live. And essentially, what we're getting is your live reactions and your active stream of thought as you're thinking through
Hmm.
things for the first time. Is that like a new process to you? Like, were you historically somebody that maybe before a client call would sit down and like really prepare and think through what you wanted to say, and it's a new skill doing it on the podcast, or is that just the way that you like to work?
I will let Laura answer first.
Well, that's why I said I was born to podcast, because I'm much better. Um,
On
uh,
the fly.
I've talked about, I did stand
Like,
up comedy and I did improv, and I'm way better at improv. The preparing for it's almost, it kills me.
that's funny. I'm the opposite. So I will say that I think some of the doing it on the fly is just necessity because of my schedule being so crazy, and it's just there's not time to think through everything immediately beforehand. Some of that I've gotten better at because I'm on new business calls all day, and basically that is improv, because you don't know what questions people are going to ask
Right.
you. You don't know how you're going to have to read the room and like delivers things slightly differently depending on how people are responsive. You have to watch their micro expressions. Okay, they seem really interested when I said this thing about dream teams. Let me dig into that further. And so I think some of it is, I think I've become a better listener And being a good listener means that you don't always come with a prepared speech.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you come with a prepared speech, then what's going to happen is you're going to show up. I mean, this even happens in relationships, right? You're like,
All
okay,
you're thinking.
yeah, like you have this fight. This is the thing I'm going to say. And I need all of my points across and I need to say them right now. And so you like come to the table and you're like, these are all the things you need to know. But it's like, where's the listening, the give and take, the actual communicating? Because like a friend of mine said, this is one of my favorite things. He said when we had dinner last week, it turns out that I'm really good at saying a lot of words. I'm not really good at communicating. Which is like such a brilliant way of saying that.
Yep.
And I think that if you get too locked into, all right, these are all the things the points I want to make about the article, you do crush that blossoming flower of what together you and the co-host are going to discover in chatting it through.
100%.
I kind of did trial and error. So I would show up and prepared, okay, I read this thing and highlighted the 4 points that I wanted to make sure that I quote. And these are the other 3 messages these are my 3 thoughts about it. But then it also reads as really stiff, I think, on a podcast setting and even in spoken word on a new biz call or anything like that. If it's supposed to sound conversational and authentic, you just can't script it like that. And then it sounds weird. I know Hamish and I, when we first started, were really neurotic about, okay, let's talk through this. Okay, do we have anything insightful to say? Because we don't want to waste people's time. And that's a valid concern. You don't want to show up and blah, 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 navel gaze and then waste everyone's time listening to you talk about yourself and pontificate on, you know, your grand thoughts you had in the bathtub. But it's like, you still want to like show up and have something of value. So it is a weird fine line. You know, you have to think through, why am I saying this? What am I communicating, or am I just saying a lot of words?
Do you think that hosting a show makes you better when you're in the interview seat for, a publication, talking to a journalist or presenting a panel, that kind of stuff? Has it helped you with your speaking and interviewing at all? Or, I mean, I know you have a lot of experience in that, so you might just already be great at it. But
no, that's a good question. I would say, like Laura, that's my natural gift, is interviewing and being curious and putting other people first and asking questions and reading them. But you know what? Now that you say it, I may have discovered the art of improv as a journalist as well, because I would show up with, okay, I need these 3 things answered. But if you just come in and you ask them dryly and you go, oh, something you just said there was interesting, let me pick up on it, can you expand? But if you're like, okay, answer question 1, great. Okay, question 2. And you kind of like you can learn a lot more. Again, it goes back to the listening. If you're listening, oh, I think I heard something in there that I wouldn't have even thought to ask. Let me ask this first. It doesn't mean you can't still have the 4 things you're going to ask, but
and if you have an adept interviewee, they're not going to let you go down the list of like prepared questions, right?
No, because they have an agenda of what they want to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and you can tell when you're being interviewed. Now that I've started being interviewed on the other side of it, you can tell when people aren't listening and when they are. I don't know that I become a better interviewer as much as more comfortable saying things myself. Because it was always, I think part of the reason I'm in PR is I'm a lot more comfortable communicating on behalf of other people. I have a hard time advocating for myself. I think it's started to give me confidence.
I think that, and this was the last thing I'll say, when we have guests, I try to kind of bring like the background human out of people when I can and ask them like kind of crazy questions, partially for my own humor, but partially to make it not just another interview when we're asking them about PR and what they do for a living.
Yeah. So, Veronica, any favorite horror stories or other favorite moments from the podcast or podcast bloopers?
Oh my goodness. Podcast bloopers are amazing. It's hard sometimes to pick which bloopers are going to make the cut because we have a lot of bloopers. So I don't know if I could pick a favorite blooper, but horror stories, oh my gosh, we've really had some amazing horror stories. The Shamrock dance situation was particularly funny, but we have had, oh my gosh, crazy. That one about the person that worked with celebrity PR and had a high profile client. It's coming back to me. They were a junior person working on an account for a high profile celebrity, and the junior person accidentally pitched an announcement on behalf of the celebrity prior to the announcement going out, and was
Right.
able to like covertly kind of pin it on the celebrity for having a mention in the fine print on their website. That one like blew my mind when we opened it.
Yeah.
It was like a pretty heavy hitter situation, and I think it was one of the first write-ins we've had where the stakes were so high and the mistake was so like, oh, it gutted me. It gutted me to read that one.
But then it worked out, right? Like they said magically
Oh,
Yes. He just
the
had that
PR gods.
secret that he had done this or she had done this, and
Right.
nobody ever found out.
God, that was amazing. Well, everyone knows about the Shamrock one. That was for me.
Yeah, that was you.
I told that. I told that live in the
And you
podcast.
admitted it was you.
Oh yeah. Any hopes for the future, Veronica, for the podcast? Do you have any like dreams for the PR wind down?
Yeah, I think as we've evolved a lot, we've kind of been able to pin down some of those guests that really make magic for us. So I think now that we have some really good propulsion behind us, we're getting pitched a lot of inbound guests. There's a lot of room for us to take a really intentional way to kind of identify those people that are really amazing spokespeople, and they fit the vibe of what we're trying to do with the show and the way that you and Laura are looking to break down industry issues and really confront things that are important in PR. I think it's nice to see kind of over the horizon the opportunity to really refine that and make some meaningful connections with those types of guests who are kind of cut from that same PR cloth and looking for that same reprieve. We've had tons of wonderful guests, but now we have a really good handle on those guests that really make magic and kind of fit into that really niche thing that you're trying to solve in the industry. So that's exciting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Veronica, for joining us as a last minute guest.
Thank you for having me. All right. Well, thank you. I'll go back to the behind the scenes.
All right.
Thanks, Veronica.
So, April, we haven't talked about things I should have been trained on yet.
Oh, okay. So what should we have been trained on, Laura?
So, were you trained on how to follow up with a reporter without annoying them into despair?
Into despair, the drama. How to follow up with a reporter without annoying them into despair.
Is anybody trained on that?
I don't think anybody is trained on it. I think we learn as we go. What have you taught yourself since you were not trained properly, Laura?
So it's funny because like early days of agency, you know, I worked for some horrible people, and the first one would just be like, you know, he just yell at you to follow up and keep calling, and it's like, dude, like really, like I can't, like it just can't. It's just, but you know, there's some people in the industry, particularly in like New York, probably, who like have no shame and don't care. Like they'll just show up at somebody's house. Like I just am not that type of person.
Yeah.
What I have done to fit into my own personality is decided that I will only follow up with somebody a certain number of times, usually maximum 3,
Uh-huh.
unless it's something I really think that somebody
Is a great fit.
but still I wouldn't go beyond 3. And what I have learned, partially from some people who work for you and other people, is to change it up. So when you follow up the second time, just don't say, hey, just following up. Say something new. Change the subject header. Say something additional or interesting, or, oh, I read what you wrote today, and it reminded me that I wanted to see if you were interested in my guy or gal. Something different. And I have to say that it works. It doesn't not work. And this is when you really have media targets that are very tailored to what you're trying to pitch. If you're just sending out a press release to, you know, 47 reporters because they're in the industry, and you don't follow up with every single one of them with like some new twist on the same thing. Pick like the 5 or 10 that you think that really would write about this, you know, and work with that. And maybe you're offering them an exclusive, you know, there might be some other bigger strategy too. And so in that case, you would want to approach them different than you're just like, hey, here's some, interesting news I thought you might want to cover, which doesn't seem to happen as much as it used to anyway. The following up with the press release thing is so 90 something. But those are the things that I've learned. Keeping your eye on social media. I mean, that didn't exist back in the day. So if you see on social media somebody might be like, hey, I'm on vacation, you'd be like, oh, well, I'm not following up with them 3 times because they're in Italy.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on switching things up. And sometimes I have a different story angle that might be a better fit if that one didn't catch them. And it's like a slight spin on what I pitched before. So I'm going to just change it 30 degrees.
Yep.
Maybe this will get them. I like the idea too, Laura, of changing the subject heading. If you sent out 50% of your emails with one subject heading and 50% of your pitches the different one, and you notice that most of them got opened that had this other subject heading, shift it up, or find a new statistic or a new example or anecdote or research report or industry trend or whatever that it speaks to, and see if maybe trying it from a slightly different angle, 30 degrees to the right or left, is going to get more traction.
Yeah. Bottom line is you need to be as targeted as possible to begin with.
Yeah.
So then following up with them isn't like, oh my God, I'm just the most annoying person in the world.
Yeah.
But I feel like when I first started learning PR at agencies, they're just like, here, like pitch this release or whatever, and just pitch it until every single person that's on this list answers you somehow. It's like, oh my God, that's so not valuable.
Well, you don't just pick up the phone and call them until you get a no.
Right. Well, that was sort of what I was told to do.
Yeah, same.
Imagine calling somebody 10 times now. Oh my God.
So, true confession, do you have an example of where you followed up way too much and a negative consequence, or followed up in the wrong way and got a negative consequence?
I'm sure there was. I just can't remember recently. Recently, and maybe I mentioned this before, I followed up with somebody who seemed completely targeted, and the reporter freaked out on me like, you don't even know what I cover, haven't you read, why are you bothering me? And I was like, okay, yeah, I did read actually what you write about, and you write about this, so okay. Sometimes people are just a little nuts.
Right, or it's like they see a very clear angle on what they're writing about, like retail, but it's got some really specific leaning,
right,
retail specific, that you aren't able to easily see, but somehow in their head it's super obvious.
Right, exactly. You think you're pitching them on something they write about, but to them, they're writing about something much different or more specific. Exactly. I think that's what happened with that one.
Yeah, that's what it sounds
but like he spent a lot of time like writing me, telling me what like a fool I was. And it was like, okay, dude, really?
Oh, I don't know how they find the time for that. I don't have the time for that. It's like delete, delete, delete. But
right, if you're gonna write, just be like, this isn't for me.
Right. Not a great fit. Thanks. Okay, so any other thoughts, feelings, or wisdom bombs you want to drop on that before we move into the anonymous PR horse story of the week?
No, let's move into the horror story.
Okay. Do not open until podcast. Hello. My boss was probably a birthday clown in another life. Maybe he should be now. I took a new agency job a few months ago because my last spot was very toxic. Shocking, right? In terms of toxic culture, the new agency is better, and that is a reprieve. No micromanaging, no expectations that you'll work until 7 every night or skip your lunch breaks, no binge drinking. But here's the thing. My boss is a startup-y guy, and his whole culture approach is do your best always, but don't take things too seriously. It's PR, not ER, which on paper is a great approach. Work hard, do a good job, but don't give yourself a stomach ulcer over it, right? Well, that's not all it means. Turns out this man loves pranks. Like, a lot. At first, I thought it was just a little bit of hazing. He'd hide my mouse pad under my chair, tape my mouse to my desk, that kind of stuff that I usually find first thing in the morning, think it was weird, but try to be a good sport, laugh, then move on with my day. But it's a whole office thing. Someone will bring an empty donut box to work and leave it in the break room to prank the boss, and then he'll do something to quote get them back, and then he thinks it's hilarious. And he's even written articles about what he calls a culture reset founded on fun. But it's getting to be too much for me. Here's where it got bad. I'm a big time coffee drinker, and I'm always making a pot at the agency office. One morning, somebody apparently decided to fill the boss's desk drawers with dozens of coffee filters. He thought it was me and retaliated, quote unquote, by loosening the screws on my chair. I'd had a hard morning. My dog recently died. I had a big client project due, and my check engine light came on. I came into the office on D Day, sat in my chair, and the arms and back clattered to the floor.
Oh my God.
I didn't fall out, but I had to spend 45 minutes reassembling it on the verge of tears from the morning I had. I wasn't even the one who did the original prank. How do I approach him with this? I want to opt out of the pranks entirely, but it's his vision, quote unquote. Ugh.
Of course it's a guy, first of all. You know, it's like the guy who wants all the attention. He's the class clown, and he's not funny, really, anyway. And this is not a circus. It's just not my personality.
It's not mine either. I know a company, not a PR agency. I know another company that does stuff like this. Not as much about the pranking, but more about this sort of like talking each other and sarcasm. So it's a lot of, oh, well, you're a piece of shit anyway, so who cares? Just lots of kind of inappropriate humor. And it's just part of the fabric of that company. And honestly, culture starts at the top. And if this is clearly what he wants, there's no way around it. So I think it's either adapt to it, be okay with it, try to stay out of it as much as you can, or move on. You're not going to change the culture if that's what he has clearly defined for himself and is something he admires about.
Right.
Sounds like this person already wasn't participating in the pranks actively and then just got dragged into it because of this coffee affiliation, which is funny. I thought they were going to say that they didn't have any coffee filters to make coffee one morning.
Right, I thought it was going to like coffee pouring out all over the place. Yeah, I don't like, but even the sarcasm thing, which I'm all about, I don't like that either at work. It's this weird Lord of the Flies or like hierarchy thing, or who's in on the joke and who's not, or I don't like it. If you're going to do that, if that's your thing, do it with your friends. You know what I mean? Don't do it at work.
Do it professionally.
Nobody's going to work to like have their life be made even more difficult. Enough.
Yeah.
Maybe you have one or two friends at work who you're sort of on the same page with that stuff, and that's good. Stick to those friends, but don't make the whole office get involved in this sort of thing. I think it's very self-centered.
Mm.
And it creates a clique and a hierarchy.
Mm. I don't really have any other advice on that other than
it's a pretty good story.
It's funny. I guess, right. I guess either try to find the humor in it or get out.
It's funny because as you were talking about, I started screwing the screws in my cheap desk chair that I have to make sure that it doesn't like collapse.
Fall apart.
Yeah, they just like come unscrewed on their own because it's such a cheap chair.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh, look at the kitty.
No, he just put its foot up. Like, Mama.
My cat is laying in front of the refrigerator to get the hot air because it's not hot enough in New York.
In her hand, she's got the whole cat. In her hand, she's got the whole cat. In her hand, she's got the whole cat in her hand. You don't even know that's from, do you?
She's got the whole world in her hand.
You do know that song.
Of course.
With that note, do you want to wrap it up?
I do. Do we have any sponsor us? You know, sometimes on this podcast, we tell you about the latest and greatest products rocking our worlds. Some are PR related, some aren't. You know, any of people involved in these products hear this, they are more than welcome to sponsor us, as we discussed during this podcast.
Uh-huh.
So the price of everything has gone through the roof, right?
Yeah.
And I like smelly candles, but a lot of times they're like $40 or something, right? And I usually have them burning, and now that I'm home most of the time working, like I could go through like one a week, and I'm not spending that kind of money on candles.
Yeah.
But if you have the coupons from, hold on, the Bed Bath & Beyond coupons.
Yes.
And then not every store, but some of them, or the Harmon, have these. Do you know the Myers
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
candles?
Yes.
So they're
Myers.
10, but if you have this, then it's what, 8? So $8.
Oh wow, that's a good deal for a candle.
And they smell really good.
Yeah.
So I often get these. So I'm a fan of the Myers Clean Day candles. This is basil.
Clean Day is definitely their best scent, I think.
So there.
I love that. Oh, Miss Myers. I like all their products. Their candles are really good. The soaps are that's all I use for soap. It's what I use for my cleaning supplies. I very pretty, Laura.
Okay.
You gonna do a seance? What's happening now?
All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in for the PR Wind Down podcast.
And thank you to Veronica.
Woo, Veronica.
Veronica for joining us today for the interview segment.
Remember to submit your own agency stories and questions and share our show with your friends and colleagues. If you subscribe and leave us a rating, it will help us reach new listeners like you.
And if you have an anonymous PR horror story of your own, please send it our way at the contact email below the episode notes.
We can't wait to wind down with you again next time. Oh my God, our producer, Veronica, just came from behind the scenes only on Zoom chat and said she has an unscented Britney Spears votive candle on her desk. And she just adds essential oils to make it scented.
Oh.
That's very smart. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Isn't she doing a remake of an Elton John song with Elton John?
Yes, it's her big comeback single.
Tiny Dancer. You know how I say I always sing songs about my cat? So that's one of the songs. Hold Me Closer, Small Fur Dancer.
Small fur dancer. Aw, that's adorable. Oh, what's that? Tiny person.
Hold me closer, tiny dancer.
I should have known.
Kitty, I'm squeezing my kitty. I'm squeezing my kitty.
So creepy.
I'm petting my kitty. Oh, I'm petting.
Oh
I'm crushing her. Crush her little head. Crush.
Like from Tommy Boy. And then I love my little pet, and then I massage it. He's talking about what he does with sales. And then he wins the sales, and then at the end he's like, and he rips the thing in half, and crumbs flying everywhere. Oh,
Chris Farley.
weird. We got off on a weird tangent.